All right, Grandpa, what in the world is that thing? Did you pull it out of a museum? The voice, sharp and laced with the easy arrogance of youth, cut through the shimmering heat of the Nevada desert. Sergeant Kyle Renner, an instructor whose crisply pressed uniform looked as new as the advanced rifle system cradled in his arms, gestured with his chin toward the old man. The man, who couldn't have been a day under 80, sat quietly on a simple wooden stool, a long, cloth-wrapped object resting across his lap. He was the grandfather of one of the junior soldiers, invited to observe the base's new long-range marksmanship demonstration. The old man, Samuel, didn't respond immediately. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, slowly and deliberately unwrapped the oilcloth. Revealed within was a rifle that looked utterly alien on this high-tech range. It was wooden-stocked, the dark walnut scarred and smoothed by decades of use. The barrel was long and heavy, its bluing worn to a soft gray patina in places. The scope mounted on top was a simple, fixed-power affair with none of the digital readouts or laser rangefinders adorning the weapons of the young soldiers gathered around. It was an M21, a relic from a bygone era. "This," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to absorb the desert's silence rather than break it, "is Eleanor." A few of the younger soldiers snickered. Sergeant Renner let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Eleanor? You named it? That's cute, Pops. Look, this isn't a plinking range. We're engaging a target at 4,000 meters. 4,000. That's 2.5 miles. My rifle, the Chaytak M200, is a state-of-the-art system designed for extreme long range. It has a custom-built ballistic computer, integrated weather sensors, and fires a 408 caliber round that stays supersonic well past 2,000 yards. What you've got there? Well, it's a beautiful piece of history, I'll give you that. But it belongs over a fireplace, not on my firing line." Samuel looked up. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, seemed to take in everything at once. The arrogant set of the sergeant's jaw, the nervous shifting of the soldiers, the faint whisper of the wind kicking up dust devils in the distance. He didn't seem offended. He seemed patient, like a mountain observing the passing of a cloud. "She'll do the job," he said, his voice calm and even. Renner's condescension hardened into irritation. This old man was undermining his authority, his display of cutting-edge military might. "The job, as you call it, is something the best shooters in this division have been trying and failing to do all week. The atmospheric conditions are a nightmare. You've got a variable crosswind and a wicked heat mirage that'll bend your shot a dozen feet off target before it's even halfway there. It's a complex ballistic problem that requires sophisticated equipment. Not Eleanor." He spat the name out like it was a bad taste in his mouth. Among the soldiers watching was Private First Class Miller, the grandson who had invited Samuel. Miller's face was burning with shame. He'd wanted his grandfather, a veteran who rarely spoke of his service, to see the modern army, to feel proud. Instead, he was being publicly humiliated. He saw the quiet dignity in his grandfather's posture and wished the ground would swallow him whole. He felt a protective anger rising, but he was a PFC. You didn't talk back to a sergeant. "All right, listen up," Renner barked, turning his back on Samuel to address the group. "Pay attention. I'm going to demonstrate the principles of extreme long-range engagement. The target is a standard steel silhouette for 1,000 meters out. Watch how I use the Kestrel to read the wind speed, input the data into my ballistic app, and adjust my scope for drop and drift." He went through the motions with a theatrical flair, a performer on a stage. He laid down on the high-tech shooting mat, settled the rifle into its bipod, and peered through his impossibly complex scope. He spent 5 minutes adjusting knobs, tapping at his wrist-mounted computer, and announcing his calculations to the assembled soldiers. "Okay, wind is 7 miles per hour, full value from the west. Barometric pressure is 2,992 and falling, factoring for spin drift and the Coriolis effect, sending it." The M200 boomed, a sharp, concussive crack that kicked up a plume of dust. The soldiers watched the distant target through high-powered spotting scopes. Seconds ticked by. 10, 15, 20. Silence. "Miss," a spotter called out over the radio. Impact was 50 meters low and 20 meters left. Renner's face tightened. Recalculating. "The Mirage is playing tricks," he fired again. Another boom. Another long wait. Miss. Further left. He fired a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. Each shot was a loud, expensive failure. The desert seemed to swallow the reports of the powerful rifle, unimpressed. Frustration radiated from Renner in waves. He, the expert, the high-tech warrior, was being defeated by simple physics. To save face, he stood up, brushing the dust from his pristine uniform. As you can see, it's a nearly impossible shot today. The conditions are just too volatile, he announced, his voice tight. But it's a good learning experience. It shows the limitations of even the most advanced technology. He then made a critical mistake, born of ego and embarrassment. He decided to turn his failure into a group joke, with Samuel as the punchline. He called up 14 of his best marksmen, one by one. Each went through the same high-tech ritual. Each settled behind a multi-thousand-dollar rifle. And each one missed. The target remained untouched. 15 misses in total from the best shooters on the base. Finally, with the sun beating down and morale sinking, Renner threw his hands up in a gesture of theatrical surrender. He laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "Anyone else?" he shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He scanned the crowd of defeated young faces, and his eyes landed on Samuel, who had been watching the entire spectacle without a change in expression. "Anyone else want to try and hit a different county?" The laughter from the soldiers was weak and strained, but it was enough to encourage Renner. He pointed directly at the old man. "How about you, Pops? You and Eleanor want to show us how it's done." The challenge hung in the hot, still air. It was a final, cruel twist of the knife, designed to complete the old man's humiliation. PFC Miller opened his mouth to protest, to say they should just go, but his grandfather was already moving. Samuel rose from his stool, his movements slow and economical, every motion honed by a lifetime of practice. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up his rifle and walked to the now empty firing position. As Samuel laid his worn canvas shooting mat on the ground, a map that looked like it had seen more continents than most of the soldiers had seen states, PFC Miller felt a surge of righteous fury. This was fundamentally wrong. Respect for your elders, for veterans, was something drilled into him since childhood. He looked at Sergeant Renner's smirking face and made a decision. He slipped away from the back of the crowd, pulling out his phone. He knew he was breaking a dozen rules, but he didn't care. He remembered seeing his grandfather's old, laminated military ID when he signed in at the front gate. The photo was of a young man with the same pale, steady eyes. He sent a text to a friend, a sergeant who worked in the base command's records department. It was a long shot. "Sergeant Davis, I know this is a huge ask, but can you run a name for me? It's for my grandfather, Samuel Blackwood. Some instructor is trying to make a fool of him out on range 12. Just want to see if there's anything in his file I can. I don't know. Use." He attached a discreet photo he'd snapped of the ID card earlier. Back on the firing line, Samuel was settling in. He ignored the high-tech rests and sandbags, instead using the simple leather sling on his rifle, wrapping it around his left arm in a practiced, fluid motion that made the rifle an extension of his body. He lay down, his old bones creaking softly, and settled the wooden stock against his shoulder. The rifle fit him perfectly, a familiar weight he had carried for a lifetime. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a wind meter, but a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he took a pinch of fine dust and tossed it into the air. He watched its path, his eyes tracking the invisible currents. He licked his index finger and held it up, feeling the faint coolness on one side. He squinted at the distant target, his gaze unfocused for a moment as he studied the shimmering waves of heat rising from the desert floor. He saw the pattern in the chaos, the rhythm in the wind. Sergeant Renner, standing behind him with his arms crossed, couldn't resist one last jab. "Don't forget to account for the curvature of the earth, old-timer. It's a real doozy at this range." Samuel didn't seem to hear him. He was no longer in Nevada. The scent of hot dust and sagebrush faded, replaced by the smell of damp earth, rotting vegetation, and cordite. The oppressive desert sun became a suffocating, triple-canopy jungle humidity. He was 25 years old again, lying in the mud of the A Shao Valley. He was holding this same rifle, its stock dark with rainwater. His target was a North Vietnamese general, over a mile away across a windswept ridge. The monsoon winds were a ghost, swirling and unpredictable. His team was counting on him. Failure meant they would all be overrun. He'd had one shot. No ballistic computer. No spotter with a radio. Just his breath, his heartbeat, and Eleanor. He remembered the feel of the trigger breaking, the recoil against his shoulder, the silent prayer he sent along with the bullet. He blinked. The jungle vanished. The heat of the Nevada sun was back on his neck. The memory, sharp and clear as glass, had settled him. It had centered him. He knew this wind. He had met it 1,000 times before in 1,000 different places. He reached up to the old scope and gave the elevation turret a single, firm click, then another for windage. They were movements born of instinct, not calculation. He let out half a breath and held it, his body becoming perfectly still. The world narrowed to the simple crosshairs in his scope. The steel silhouette, distorted and dancing in the mirage, steadied in his sight. He wasn't aiming at where it was. He was aiming at where it was going to be when his bullet arrived 20 seconds from now. He applied gentle pressure to the trigger. The crack of the M21 was different from the M200. It was a deeper, more resonant boom, the sound of history speaking. The recoil pushed firmly into Samuel's shoulder, a familiar and comforting shove. He didn't lift his head. He stayed perfectly still, looking through the scope, watching his own vapor trail snake through the air. An eternity seemed to pass in the silence that followed. The young soldiers held their breath. Sergeant Renner had a smirk frozen on his face, ready to deliver the final, mocking punchline. Then, a sound came back over the range's sensitive audio system. It wasn't the dull thud of a bullet hitting the dirt berm. It was a faint, high-pitched ping. For a second, nobody moved. They couldn't believe it. Then the spotter's voice, raw with shock and disbelief, erupted from the radio speakers. Hit. Hit. Dead center. I repeat, direct hit on target. Holy! A wave of astonished shouts and cheers erupted from the younger soldiers. They forgot their allegiance to their instructor and swarmed forward, their faces alight with awe. PFC Miller stood frozen, a gigantic grin spreading across his face. Sergeant Renner's jaw had gone slack, his face a pale mask of utter shock. It was impossible. It was a 1-in-a-million fluke. It had to be. But before he could process it, another sound intruded, growing rapidly louder. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors. 2 UH-60 Black Hawks, their fuselages painted in the markings of the base command, were descending fast toward the range, kicking up a storm of dust. At the same time, the wail of sirens grew from the main road. A convoy of black SUVs, led by military police, was speeding toward their position, lights flashing. Every soldier on the range froze, their celebration cut short. This kind of response meant only one thing: a major security incident or the arrival of a very, very important person. Renner's confusion morphed into panic. What had he done? Had the old man's stray round hit something it wasn't supposed to? The lead SUV screeched to a halt just yards from the firing line. The door flew open and out stepped a man who radiated an aura of absolute command. He wore the uniform of a lieutenant general, 3 silver stars gleaming on his collar. It was General Marcus Thorne, the base commander, and his face was a thundercloud of cold fury. Renner, his mind reeling, snapped to the most rigid position of attention he could manage. General Thorne. Sir. An unexpected honor. General Thorne didn't even glance at him. He walked past the stunned sergeant as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed on the old man who was now slowly getting to his feet and beginning to wipe down his rifle. The general stopped directly in front of Samuel. The entire range fell into a dead, profound silence. Then, General Thorne executed the sharpest, most perfect salute Renner had ever seen in his life. It wasn't the casual salute one gives a subordinate. It was a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect. Mr. Blackwood. The general's voice was clear and strong. It's an honor to see you again, sir. I apologize for the reception. Samuel gave the general a small, weary nod. Marcus, you're looking well. No need to apologize. The boy was just having a bit of sport. Thorne's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, his gaze finally falling upon the pale and trembling Sergeant Renner. His voice dropped several degrees, becoming as cold and hard as chipped granite. Sergeant, he began, his tone deceptively soft. Do you have any idea who you were just mocking? Do you have any clue who you called Grandpa? Renner could only shake his head, mute. "This is Samuel Blackwood," the general announced, his voice now booming across the range for all to hear. To the United States Army, and to a very small, very select community, he is known by another name. A name whispered in legends for 50 years. They called him the Ghost. A collective gasp went through the crowd of soldiers. "This man," Thorne continued, pointing a rigid finger at Samuel, "holds the third longest confirmed combat kill in U.S. military history. A shot he made in a typhoon with that exact rifle. He wrote the doctrine on long-range marksmanship that your instructors studied at Fort Benning. He pioneered the techniques of reading wind and mirage that your fancy computers are still trying to replicate. He served in 3 wars, most of his operations so highly classified they will never see the light of day. The medals he was awarded are locked in a vault at the Pentagon because he was not allowed to wear them publicly. He is not a guest of his grandson. He is here today as my personal guest to provide his assessment on the effectiveness of this billion-dollar training program you are running." The general took a step closer to Renner, his eyes boring into the younger man. "That rifle you called a museum piece? That's Eleanor," just as he said. "It's a registered national asset of historical significance. Mr. Blackwood is the only person on this planet authorized to handle it. You didn't just disrespect an old man, Sergeant. You disrespected a living legend. You disrespected the very foundation of the skills you claim to teach." Renner looked like he was about to collapse. He opened his mouth, but only a dry croak came out. "Your career as a marksmanship instructor is over, effective immediately," Thorne stated flatly. "You will be reassigned pending a full review of your conduct. You are a disgrace to the uniform and to the legacy of men like him." The condemnation hung in the air, absolute and final. But then, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Easy, Marcus." It was Samuel. He had placed a gnarled hand on the general's arm. His pale blue eyes were not angry. They were filled with a kind of weary understanding. "He's just a boy," Samuel said softly, looking at the broken sergeant. "Full of fire and pride. It's the way we build them." He didn't know. He then turned to face Renner directly. The sergeant flinched, expecting more scorn, more anger. Instead, the old man's expression was one of gentle pity. "Son," Samuel said, his voice kind, "arrogance is heavier than any piece of gear you'll ever carry. It'll slow you down more than any crosswind. The best thing you can do is learn to set it down." He paused, then gestured with his head toward the distant, shimmering target. "Now, do you want to know how I made that shot? Do you want to learn how I read that wind?" Stunned, humbled, and with tears welling in his eyes, Sergeant Kyle Renner could only nod. The greatest lesson of his life was about to begin, not with a computer or a high-tech gadget, but with a pinch of dust in the hand of a quiet, 80-year-old man. It's stories like these, of hidden greatness and the lessons of humility, that remind us of what truly matters. If you believe these timeless values are worth sharing, consider subscribing for more stories that honor the quiet heroes among us.